Well, hello, everyone. My name is Amy Crumpton, and I have been a Master Gardener with the Arlington and City of Alexandria Division for the Virginia Cooperative Extension since 2015. As Kirsten said, I am the head of the chair of the Public Education Committee for our group, and I also am a member of the Master Gardeners of Northern Virginia, who are the sort of sister organization that helps get things done after we've been trained by the VCE. And the Master Gardeners, we have a help desk, which I think right now is still up and available, but only through email, if I understand correctly. And we have plant clinics in the before times. We had plant clinics, and hopefully we'll have more of those again. We have these kinds of classes. Technically, we would used to do most of our classes in the libraries or the community centers. And we have some beautiful demonstration gardens in Arlington and Alexandria that are wonderful places to go and see all manner of plants and see some really important landscaping types of techniques if you know, for your own garden. Our website is mgnv.org, and the Extension Service website is w.ext.vt.edu. There's loads of resources on both of those things, but in particular on the Master Gardeners mgnv.org website, we have some great resources about native plants and landscaping, and I encourage you all to go there and look. Also, as Kirsten mentioned, this class is going to be recorded, and it will be part of the Master Gardener virtual classroom that we have, and that classroom now has, gosh, I don't know, I think we have 30 or so or more videos, and many of those videos are on best management practices for both sustainable landscaping and for urban agriculture, and as well as just sort of best management practices across the board for different kinds of yard needs. So I encourage you all to go there and check that out. All right, sustainable landscaping basics. Today, I'm going to talk about the principles of sustainable landscaping. I'm going to talk about the difference between sustainable landscaping and conventional practices. I'm going to give you some kind of a run through of how you might do your own site assessment for your own yard and how that leads to an understanding of sort of foundations for information for how you would then think about design in your yard. And then I'm just going to throw at you a few landscape scenarios from some of our master gardeners so you can kind of see what some of the others have done and how they've tackled a few challenges. This particular information, intellectual discussion comes out of the Landscape for Life program. Landscapeforlife.org is a program that was created, I think, like mid-2000s with the American Society of Landscape Architects, the U.S. Botanical Gardens, Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. They created a 6-week workshop that was just wonderful. 6 weeks of six classes over 6 weeks that would be also information on all kinds of ways you can deal with your yard, but also had you actually mapping out and graphing out your yard at the same time. So it's teaching people some real design, practical design methods. What we've done for the Master Gardeners program here is we have taken a lot of that information and we've tried to compress it and streamline it a little bit so that we could deliver it in the library settings and in these kinds of settings so that more people could at least get an overview of what it's about. The original way it's done is pretty intensive. Usually you can only have, 20 people, and then it takes that 6 weeks and all that sort of thing. And there's a lot of back and forth. But hopefully this will give you at least an overview and a foundation of what sustainable landscaping is about. And that you'll be able to use and understand when you're going out into your own yard. So we'll have questions a couple of times, but if you have questions as we're going on, please put them in the chat box. And I've told Kirsten if there's something that's just needs clarification or it needs to be answered right away, then she's more than welcome to butt in and let me know. All right, so what is a sustainable landscape? Well, a sustainable landscape, it maximizes environmental and human health benefits for current and future generations. It's really based on that 7th generation principle. And when we talk about sustainability here, we're talking about primarily in these urban and rural, urban and suburban settings, right? How we can continue to nurture and have, any kind of plant growth in these pretty tough conditions. So the principles of sustainable landscaping are huge. It's a very large, umbrella. So the idea for these techniques and these methods will be that you'll help to support human health and well-being. You'll protect clean air and clean water. You'll capture and store water. You'll build healthy and fertile soil. You'll conserve resources. You'll support habitat for wildlife. You'll control erosion and sediment runoff. You'll sequester carbon, and you'll mitigate the urban heat island effect. Yeah, your yard is going to help do all this, okay? These are the principles that came out of the original sustainable sites discussion that led to Landscape for Life, right? These are all really focused on the built environment. So that's why we're talking about things like erosion and sediment runoff and the sequestering of carbon and urban heat island effect. What these principles are also part of and based upon are conservation landscaping, ecological landscaping ideas. And so we also have something that we also look at is the conservation landscaping that has been the principles for those, which are essentially the same. You benefit the human health, environment, human health, air quality, water, healthy soil, reducing your uses of different kinds of materials, habitat for wildlife. This one then gets into using the appropriate local native plants and managing the removal of invasive plants. Those are the differences between when you talk about it from sustainability, that intellectual history, and when you're coming from it from the conservation, ecological side of things. But right now, all of these things are fusing together, and we have in front of us an enormous amount of information, which sometimes is a little overwhelming, I will admit, an enormous number of ideas, methods, practices that we can try to use in our own yards. For those of you who already know a lot about this issue, you're going to find that my overview is going to probably leave some stuff out because it just can keep going, right? But for those of you who are new to this issue, please don't feel overwhelmed. All I'm trying to do is give you a sort of an overview, and you pick and choose the things that you can try, right? All right. So these kinds of principles, these kinds of practices that follow these principles that I'm going to talk about, I mean, you can use them to transform a front entrance. You can use it to transform a back corner, any part of your yard, or you can even radically reimagine your entire yard. Okay, so it's up to you how much energy you have to do some of this stuff, but even the little stuff counts. I want to make clear that the Plant Nova Natives campaign, which some of you may know about, their mission is to get 100,000 people to plant one native plant. Okay, that's a very noble mission, but I honestly think we can do more than that, right? And most people who have come to these kinds of talks, they're ready to do more than that. They're ready to put more than just one plant. They're ready to put make a novel community of native plants in their yards, or do things that would really, they can see the difference. Okay, so conventional versus sustainable practices. I'm sure this is the kind of back and forth you all see all the time. If you take a walk through your neighborhood, you're going to see some great yards, and you're going to see some yards you're like, oh no, they're not really doing anything, right? In a conventional yard, you basically, lawn is the default, right? And the plantings that are usually put in are often non-native plants. They're ornamental plants. Sometimes they're actually invasive, sometimes they're not, but often there's not very many of them, and they're used in these sort of ornamental ways, excuse me, ornamental ways, and they don't have they haven't built a real, little ecosystem there. They're just kind of there. They're kind of like arranging Legos. It's not very inspiring. The sustainable practices are urging people to go beyond that. They're urging people to take up some of that lawn in particular. That's probably one of the biggest issues that most of us face is a lot of lawn. But put in plants that are much more amenable to our local conditions, our local weather, our local wildlife. And we have a lot of things we need to try to use these plants to enhance what we call ecosystem services. Ecosystem services are things like collecting water, getting water back into the groundwater table. They are things like conserving our soil so it doesn't run off into the bay and create problems there. And again, of course, support our local wildlife. And if any of you have been listening to or reading about wildlife worldwide, you know that there is a crisis on the insect front, on the bird front, on all kinds of fronts. And a lot of it is because of our land use practices. We've literally stripped the land clean of anything that would support their habitat. So let's start with soil. So soil is basic, and it's the most important, and it's probably the most, you know, the one people just want to move right on past and get to the plants, right? I understand that. The problem with a lot of our soil is that it's very compacted and it's very degraded. And as you can see, it's compacted and degraded because of poor plants choices, a lot of you know, foot traffic or road traffic or whatever. Rain can just beat it down and so forth. And all of this will contribute to erosion. It restricts plant growth in general. It limits the soil's ability to absorb water. So then it's just running off into the streets. And it decreases the soil's biological activity, meaning our soil biome which is also part of our ecological habitat and part of our wildlife, essentially, under our feet, is also in dire straits. So a healthy soil, as you can see in the picture down there, the healthy soil should look like little pieces with air between them, right? Soil is basically made up of crushed up rock that turns into minerals, and it's made up of little biota. It's made up of air. It's got all kinds of things in it, but the air pockets in the soil is what allows water to come through. So in a compacted soil situation, as on the far right, you can see that you've got this sort of plating effect that's happened. Everything's been squished and plated, and then the water just can't get through. So that's not good. So we want to change that. So what do we do? So we want to rehabilitate our soil. And the best way to do that, I mean, you can do it by just simply top dressing with compost, hardwood, or leaf mulch. You can just start putting some plants in. You could put like ryegrass in, or you could put clover in, something to just kind of get the soil, start to help break the soil structure up. You can put the right plants into your conditions. And when we get to the plants, the wonderful thing about native plants is they often have a real wide variety of conditions that they can live in. So you can have a lot of choices around here. You can aerate the soil, but you want to avoid tilling the soil like the old-fashioned tillers and really turning things up real deep, because all that does is just break up whatever biome you have left, and it also releases carbon. You don't want to do that. You want to try to avoid that, but there will be times when you probably can't avoid that because it's so your soil is so compressed. You got to get it a little deeper in there. One way you can tell if you have really compressed soil, usually it's pretty obvious. You don't really have to do much to know that. But if you take a screwdriver and just sort of drive it into the ground and it just doesn't go anywhere, you can pretty much bet you have compressed soil. The other thing is that sometimes too, particularly in older, after there's been a new house been built, or even in older lawns and so forth, you can also have what's called a hard pan down beneath, the soil, the new soil that's been put over top, and that can also cause problems. So that might mean you need to put in some plants that have really deep root systems to help you break through that. So there are different things going on in your soil, and sometimes kind of figuring that out could take a little bit of time. You can use raised beds, going to assist you in drainage. You want to avoid pesticides and herbicides as much as possible, because those things can get into the water table. If you are having to use some kind of pesticide for something or some kind of herbicide, please follow the instructions. Do exactly what it says, no more than what it tells you, because more is not better on that score. The other thing you can do is conduct a soil test, and Master Gardeners are known for it. That's one of our mantras: conduct a soil test, where you can take up some soil, you can put it in a small box and send it to the Virginia Cooperative Extensions Lab to see what's going on in your soil. And it can tell you, if you need certain kinds of nutrients and that sort of thing. That is another thing you can do. And particularly if you have a really specific idea of something you want in your yard, like you want to put blueberry bushes in or something along that line, a soil test might be helpful to see what your soil pH is, so that you'll know if you need to do more to help that particular area to support those kinds of plants. Compost. This is another mantra, compost. So compost is a really important part of this process. Technically, in a forest system or a usual system, things are going to be composting in situ. If you've ever stepped off of a trail in the forest and you kind of fluff down, right, there's sticks and leaves and all kinds of things breaking up, right, and providing a wonderful rich soil layer for that forest floor. Around here, we can do that in our own garden bed, something kind of similar, but we can also take any extraneous materials, plant materials, and kitchen scraps, particularly vegetable kitchen scraps, not meat scraps or dairy, but vegetable kitchen scraps, and put them into a compost pile and create our own, what we call black gold, right? And that can be put down onto your piles. And I would say too that getting your own compost going, if you have the room to do it, is important, because I just recently bought a few bags of compost from a garden center to put onto a vegetable garden, opened them up, plopped them in, and then I stood there for a minute and thought, what's going on? And the soil, that compost, was filled with shredded plastic pieces. I got on my hands and knees and started pulling it all out. And finally, I just like, screw this. I just had to scrape it all up and threw it away. Went back to the garden center and took it back to them and said, look, something happened. They've got plastic in their compost in these bags. And so not only was, of course, I buying plastic bags full of compost, which is, not exactly sustainable, but you have more control if you've got some compost system to be able to ensure the quality of what's going down into your yard. What else can you do? You can mulch correctly. Mulching is a really important process because we haven't allowed enough biomaterial to decompose around our trees and around our beds and so forth. But you need to need to mulch in a correct manner. You don't want to put more than 2 or 3 inches deep of compost around stuff. You want to make sure that you've got the compost pulled back from the plant bases so that you're not smothering right around the plant. You do not want to have compost mulched up your trees like a volcano, because all that does is encourage root flare growth around in that mulch, and it's just really quite bad. It'll cause rot. All right, so you want to mulch correctly. You can even mulch by just recycling your plant cuttings every year. Just throw them down onto the bed. You can put them in the compost, or you can just throw them down on the bed. You can just keep them going that way. Also, avoid landscaping cloth. Landscaping cloth is good for some certain things, and I'll show you a couple of things where it's been used, but landscaping cloth in general, just across the bed, it just serves no purpose. It interferes with gas exchange. Water can get in, but the gas exchange is poor. And all you're really doing, if you put compost or if you put mulch on top of that, is you're then creating a soil layer on top of that, so you're still going to get weeds. So, just avoid that. And plus it's more plastic. So I think the stuff that I had in my unfortunate bags of compost that I bought was probably this kind of plastic landscaping cloth that had gotten shredded up in their mill. You could just do leaf and green mulch. Leaving the leaves is really, really easy, and it is like a no-brainer in terms of energy efficiency. It's already coming down around the tree. That's what the tree uses to break down and provide its own nutrients for the winter, to protect its own roots in the soil over winter. There are many, many insects, and particularly fireflies, that use down leaves and down leaf mulch to overwinter. And so, when we scrape all this up and put it into the curb onto the street, it's just throwing something away that's really vital to our plant life. The other thing is, you're seeing a photo here of leaves raked into the street. Most codes, most places, the leaves should never be raked into the street. Because then that just creates potential for them to wash down into the storm sewer system and then out into the bay and just provide more biomass and stuff out away from us into the stream system. So you're supposed to leave them on your curb if you want them to be taken away. Nobody does it. It's one of those cultural habits that we have done. Green mulch just simply means plants. I mean, it means putting in plants around your trees. You can do that very easily with certain seed, certain things, or you can get plants now that have these, they come in little, they're smallish plants. They come in little small root kinds of packaging, so that you don't have to have a big pot and dig a big hole. You can do things, slip them in much easier ways. So how would you tackle this situation? I mean, this is so common around here, isn't it? I mean, if all of you walked around your own yards and your own neighborhoods, once we're finished with this and you walk around your own neighborhood, let me just tell you, you can't unsee it anymore, okay? You'll see all of the difficulties that we face as a community in terms of how we deal with our landscapes. But this is kind of typical. We live in a very forested area. We're in the northeastern forest biome. We have probably a lot of good native trees, but then the understory stuff, the shrubs are usually kind of gone. And then, we have a lot of ivy. We have a lot of other invasive plants that are all over that have been planted as ornamentals or as the thing to plant to stop erosion, 20, 30 years ago or more. And now we have these situations where it's just really untenable. And so this is pretty common. So some things you could do to deal with this and kind of keep your soil in place are to terrace. You can terrace using things like core logs, which are they're coconut fiber logs, and straw logs. I've seen that, places like Home Depot sell this stuff now. They didn't before, they've started selling them. They're real easy to work with, and then they just break down over time. What you would do, as you can see, is you could either, with the core logs in particular, those are often used most often in stream or say like a pond side or water side edging, and you stick like willow branches in there to root and grow. So you can do the same kind of thing in your own yard. You can stick small saplings in there. Of course, you got to keep watering and stuff like that, and plant behind the core log. As it deteriorates, then the root system should start to hold the soil in place. You can do even more, rustic kinds of stuff, leaving down logs and large sticks and things like that, large limbs along your slope to help slow down, any kind of erosion and to just start to decompose there. You can use recycled materials like concrete or even some stone and that sort of thing to make little walls if you want to be a little bit more formal. Or you can just plant. And this requires a little more effort. And in the situation where you're dealing with like a lot of ivy across a good sized slope, it may make sense to only do like half a slope at the top, do like the top half, get that planted, and then do the bottom half so that you're not having all at once. Let things start to grow in so that you don't have any kind of erosion problems early on. But you can be as creative as you want to be, and using stone and other things to make staircases and pathways is really a nice thing to do out there too. So it's possible to deal with that kind of problem, and it can be done sometimes pretty simply, particularly if you're just using plants. All right, so water. That's our second element here, water. So we waste a lot of water on the lawns in particular, and we pollute a lot of water because it's running off of the lawns are running off of our hardscape and picking up, all kinds of chemicals or nutrients or whatever and going into the water stream. So in the conventional landscape, the lawn irrigation can consume up to 30% of the municipal fresh water in the eastern United States and up to 60% in the West, which is ridiculous when we understand that our fresh water is very much a finite resource. Stormwater runoff, it contributes to pollution by removing, like I said, the nutrients from the soil, and it washes all this stuff into the bay, literally into the storm sewers and into the bay. The little picture on the left with the stones and the water running off of through the pipe, it's somebody has piped the water coming off of their roof all the way under their yard and into this little rock bed, and then it washes off onto the sidewalk into the street. And I think they might have actually paid a landscaper to do that for them. And I thought, oh no, that's just not right. That water can be retained on your property, and you should never ever if you see anything like this, it's not correct. Do not be fooled that this is the right way to deal with your water coming out of your property. Water shouldn't be running off your property if you can help it. And I think that most jurisdictions would prefer you to try to keep as much water on there as possible. But this, of course, creates a lovely ice slick, you know, for the sidewalk. And it just misses, they even put new plants. I didn't show you the plants. There were plants, they put a few new plants in, but it just misses the opportunity to keep the bed watered. So anyway, as I said, that's one of those things. I walked around and I started seeing stuff and started taking pictures. So you can redirect the water and retain the water through a number of ways, through planting more trees and shrubs in particular, through using permeable kinds of materials on your walkways or on your driveways. You can terrace, as I mentioned. You can put in, so terracing has a dual function really. You can use rain barrels, you can use dry wells, which are essentially a kind of rain barrel, but it's buried underneath. That one really requires a lot more churning of your soil and digging up stuff, but it might be the right solution if you have a particular problem. French drains, which are essentially, a channel about a foot deep with a pipe, a permeated pipe in it, and then rock and so forth. A bioswale, which is a lot less deep, which is probably you can do 6 inches or 8 inches deep, and you are just trying to add in some fluffier topsoil and compost and mulch and put plants in that to help soak things up. And then rain gardens, which again they can be as complex as you might need them to be, but they can also be fairly simple. The Fairfax counties, the Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District has a wonderful booklet about rain gardens, and that's one of the things that's on the resource sheet that I hope you all can get access to, that I provided. You want to plant trees. Trees really do provide, they're part of this new green infrastructure movement, but they always seem to get the shortest shrift because they're the thing that keeps getting cut down or moved around or whatever. And it takes time for a young tree to grow back, right? And it also takes time for a tree. This one on the right here is a black gum. It takes time for them to get big enough to be able to provide all the ecosystem services that we really need. So this tree, for example, I think I got these numbers off of iTree. The iTree is a wonderful application that you can use when you start mapping your plants and trying to learn what your plants are in your yard and your trees. You can actually use that calculator to figure out how much air pollution have these trees taken up, and how much oxygen and are they producing, and how much water. So you can get a really much better sort of ecological understanding of what services are in your yard already. So this tree, this little 10-year-old tree, I think I might have said a 20-year-old tree is what I put it in as a 20-year-old tree. You can see that the amounts of ecosystem services it provides. 48 pounds of air pollution a year, 260 pounds of oxygen produced a year. Can cool things up to cool the buildings around it up to 13%. It can increase property values. It can intercept a lot of stormwater, and many of these trees have specific numbers of Lepidoptera caterpillars which they host. And so they are, our trees are probably our most sort of sacred plants in terms of providing huge amounts of habitat. So that's another reason to plant a tree. So what else? You use the right plants when you're dealing with water. If you create a rain garden, you need to make sure you're using the right plants for those spaces. Plants that have deep root systems. On the right-hand side, this photo actually came after the Texas Tribune did a big expose on what happened to the East Texas after the Harvey hurricane and all of that water that was everywhere around Houston. And they showed this picture of switchgrass because a lot of that native landscape in that area used to be fields of switchgrass. And the switchgrass, as you can see, has an enormous root system. So a lot of our it's probably like 10 feet. And many of our native plants have those long, deep root systems that can get down into, break up the soil, open up the soil, aerate the soil, can pull water down into our water table and really, really function as a really important part of managing our water. The other thing is, as I've mentioned, and I know a lot of people are, reduce your lawn. So I didn't say get rid of your lawn because I already know that that's a lot of work. That is a lot of work. We have something like 40 to 42 million acres of lawn in the United States, and that includes not just commercial residential lawns, but I think it also commercial lawn. It might even include, football stadiums and whatever, that kind of stuff. But if you can reduce your lawn, so if you everybody reduced that lawn, that 42 million acres by a quarter, that's like 10 million acres reduced put back into a plausible ecological use, right? So I challenge you to think about your lawn as using it to connect spaces, as pathway or as edging, but avoid it as the default. Now you're going to have times where you're going to need some lawn. You need it for pets. You might need it because you need a little play space and so forth. And a lot of what I've been seeing in terms of sustainable design ideas are to create rooms where you just have a bit of lawn, and then around it you have, you're edging around that piece of lawn with lots of native plants. The problem too with lawn is that lawn and trees don't mix well. Lawn needs a very basic soil pH, and trees need a more acidic soil pH. So when you're putting fertilizer on your lawn everywhere and everything, it's not doing your trees any help. It's not helping them. It's not good for them. And so removing it at least from around your trees and giving your trees the appropriate amount of what I would call mulch space, and mulch space around a tree literally ought to be to the drip line of the tree. The drip line meaning the largest branches out, kind of come straight down. But it's a pretty good sized area where you can then put other kinds of plants in, just mulch it for a while until you've decided or whatever. But that is really what the tree needs. It does not leave the leaves around it right there. It does not need the lawn around it. As I said, you can expand the mulch zone around your trees. You can connect your tree mulch zones to your plant beds. Try to start making that idea of connectivity is one that keeps being raised when we talk about larger landscapes and providing, habitat corridors, wildlife corridors. Think of your own yard that way. How can you connect things so that, things can move through it? How can you connect it so that when you water, things are sharing the watering system? The roots themselves, and particularly with different kinds of trees and so forth, the roots themselves for trees will share nutrients with each other. So in a forest system, that's happening all the time, and we've kind of, cut that up. So think about that you're trying to help below the surface as much as create a pleasing and habitat-friendly environment above. You can just mow less often too. You can mow less often and treat your yard. It's called a freedom lawn. That's what I've done. I just let the violets come up in it and just keep taking little bits of it at a time away and making my bed spaces larger. That's also perfectly legitimate. I mean, violets are a native plant. They provide a lot of habitat for a lot of food sources for bees and for fritillary butterflies. So, those kinds of approaches are also legitimate. So I think that the more we see of that around us, the more we see other people doing it, the more it becomes normalized, which I think is important, because a lot of times we're just like, well, our sense of beauty is a certain kind of lawn, certain green and so forth. And as we see more people do it, I think hopefully that will start to sink in that that's perfectly normal for us to go this direction. This is a really good example of somebody who was very creative in taking up some of their lawn. They took out, big bed spaces, and they kept it, as you can see, they did keep things open enough between the bed spaces. So if they were to mow around, they would be able to get their mower through. But the bed spaces are also created in a way that they can get into the beds to do work and so forth. It's just a kind of a lovely idea that I think this person did. Energy. So your home can actually benefit energy-wise from the plants around you in your yard, okay? The single-family homes in the U.S. use something like 22% of all energy consumed. That's pretty huge. And if you thoughtfully design your landscape, think through your landscape, you can actually help to reduce the uses of that energy. So one way that you approach this particular idea is that you think through, literally, which way is your house facing? Where's the morning sun? Where's the evening sun? How does that switch or sort of move in the winter versus summer? Do you have windows where you have a lot of blinding sun come in, you know, in the summertime? Or is it really cold in this one area in the back, you know, all the time? It's so always breezy through these doors. You can actually create windbreaks in your yard using primarily shrubs, small trees, to help you prevent that kind of wind blowing onto your home. You can actually use, you know, your foundation plants in a way that actually helps to keep a sort of insulation around your house. You can use trees. We'll come back to that one. You can use trees to actually provide shade, of course, in the summer, and that will help cool the house. So one of the issues, though, of course, is that the lot size for many homes has decreased while the house has increased, right? So you do have a reduction in yard space for some of the larger homes. So it makes it a little more challenging to do the kind of windbreak I'm explaining to you, because there's certain kinds of metrics that you use to do those windbreaks. But whatever you have around, you know, whatever kind of space you have, you're going to be able to find some kind of interesting, useful technique, I think, to help you with some of these issues. As I said, you can shade near the house with deciduous trees that would then defoliate in the winter, so then you would get that winter sun back through that area. You would try to help shade your surfaces of your driveways and hardscape. And this is the same idea as what is being used to argue for more street trees by our local arborists, right? They're trying to reduce the urban heat island effect by shading over or shading around the places that are reflecting up and holding heat. So the windbreak idea, which I think is a very cool one, but the ideal one, you know, there's a certain distance from the house that you need to be in order to help break the wind. You can use multiple rows of vegetation. The one thing I want to say about a windbreaker, even a hedge, I would argue that don't ever use all the same thing. If you use all the same plant in some of these sort of landscaped ideas, then you would be susceptible if something were to get into, you know, some kind of disease or pest gets into there and ruins the plants. You know, they're just one after the other, it's going to go down. So it's better to have a mixed hedge of different kinds of plants, which will help you, which I think will help support a healthier plant zone and keep that kind of a technique going longer for you. You want to be careful of where you're putting things around the power lines, right? And this is, you know, this is a graph that shows an illustration, excuse me, that shows, you know, how far you really need to be from power lines when you're, and how planting smaller trees closer to power lines, moving them, you know, they can get taller and taller around you. But you all have seen, I'm sure, you know, trees that have just been completely brutalized by the power company, because they'll just come in and cut out a U of it, or just take half of it off, and it's only got one half of it. It just, those look awful, and they're not healthy trees anymore. They really are now more susceptible to disease. They're just not going to last as long. So this is important too, when you're thinking through where to plant your trees. Be careful of things like the power lines. Where are your buildings and your other kinds of structures? Again, there is a kind of parameters on how far these things should be from those buildings, because what you're trying to do is allow enough root space, because you don't want the tree to be so close that then it gets into the foundation of the house or whatever. So there are these kinds of ideas about how far something should be from something. And this, of course, means you need to understand how big your tree is going to be at maturity, right? How big your trees are going to maturity, or even your shrubs are going to be at maturity. So, and also remember that anytime you're thinking about putting new things into your yard, particularly trees or shrubs, remember that at the fence line, if anything is reaching over into your neighbor's yard, they have the perfect authorization, legal right to cut or prune it back, right? So, and that can be a little disconcerting if it's a really lovely shaped tree, and then they come and just kind of hack it right down the line there. So make sure you move things back into your yard enough so that when something comes to its full habit, you won't have things that might get chopped up by somebody else because they don't want it hanging in their yard. I'll reduce outdoor light pollution. This is another important aspect of our gardens that we don't probably think of that much. The International Dark Sky Association has a wonderful website that has all kinds of information on exactly what to do about outdoor lighting, what kinds of things you're looking for with outdoor lighting. And as you can see, outdoor lighting, we have a lot of wasted outdoor lighting. We keep our lights on. A lot of people keep their lights on all night long, right? Outside lights on all night long. So they have a lot of, and nocturnal insects, of course, are then interrupted by this. So that's also part of what is diminishing their habitat, is they don't have what they need nocturnally, dark at night, to survive. So you should only be lighting up what you need, and motion sensor light probably best. You don't want to illuminate things. You don't want to put something. I've had this happen around us. Somebody puts it's like a Walmart parking lot. They put the light off the second story, underneath the eave on the second story, and they turn it on, and then it just lights up everybody's yard. It's just not just theirs, just everybody. And you're like, that shouldn't happen, right? That's just not useful. So you just want to light up where you need to be looking or where you need to be walking. You don't want them brighter than necessary. The Dark Skies site talks about this temperature, color temperature for different kinds of light, and you want to make sure that it's less than 3,000 kelvins color temperature. And I think a lot of things now will, when you're buying lights, the light bulbs, it will give you that kind of information. You want it downward, et cetera, et cetera. So that's really important when you're thinking about putting in new lighting, to make sure you're not contributing to more light pollution. You also want to try to limit the use of gas-powered equipment if you can. And I know all of you have been annoyed by neighbors who have landscape companies come and for like 20 minutes, all you hear is powered mowers and leaf blowers and all that kind of stuff. But those kinds of things do use a lot of energy, and they produce a lot of pollution. And if it's possible to move to electric or even to hand pushed, that is a better or battery operated. That's a better solution for this particular use. There is, of course, the input problem at the other end if you're using battery operated or other kinds of equipment that have a lot of requirements and a lot of materials that come from places, the sustainability question kind of keeps filtering upward. So you're designing your yard to limit these needs, to limit how much you mow, or it would be a good idea.
Going back to your section on composting.
Yes.
How do you feel about using pine needles for mulch?
Pine needles are perfectly fine. If you've got a pine trees already in your yard, then that's there. They are highly acidic. Isn't that correct, Kristen? So
I'm sorry. I don't know. I haven't seen that.
I don't think that's a real problem. I think the only mulching that I've heard that has some issues is bark mulch, because it doesn't break down that quickly. So shredded hardwood mulch is preferable to bark mulch, unless of course you're using it to line a pathway. If you're using to line a pathway, that's perfect then, because it shouldn't break down as fast. But arborist mulch, which is the mulch that literally when they take a tree down and just chop it on up, that fresh kind of hardwood mulch is considered the highest grade. That if you can get that, then that's really great. You can actually ask arborist companies if they have it. But one issue you want to be sure of, though, is if you're getting that kind of mulch, you don't want to get it from trees that are diseased. So if the tree's been taken down because it had a disease, then you might not want to get that into your yard.
Okay.
I don't know enough about pine straw mulch. I really don't, but yeah, I think it's okay.
Other questions about leaves. Is there such a thing as having too many leaves?
That's a good question. So what I do, I have a huge maple tree in my backyard, and I have a lot of leaves. And so what I do is as I put about maybe a quarter to a third into the compost system. I put maybe a third or so into the plant beds, and then I try to leave a third, around the tree in the yard or whatever. And sometimes because one thing that does happen is if you've got loose leaves, they're going to blow everywhere, right? So Putting them into your beds, just raking them into your beds can stop that. And I try to let them just tumble as long as possible, but sometimes I will just mulch mow. If there's leaves on the grass, I mulch mow those a little bit to break them down a little bit more. That is perfectly fine for your lawn. If you wanted to mulch mow leaves into your lawn, it provides some nitrogen into your lawn. It's just not a big deal. And it's another way just to, keep the leaves onto your property.
Okay, there's a question about planting density. Are there any ideas that you have about increasing plant density that won't impact the future growth of the more desirable perennials?
Well, I mean, so I think when I showed the sustainable version, the conventional versus sustainable home, and you saw that planting area, it looked all like there's still mulch in there because I think it was fairly newly planted. But by the time that starts to all grow in, then you shouldn't need to put that mulch in there anymore. So the mulch is kind of a temporary thing. But obviously the best thing to do is just plant a ground cover plant. I mean, you can plant a ground cover plant and then just let that run through, and you wouldn't need to mulch at all. Yeah, it's gonna depend on your situation, and it might take a little work, but it can be done, I think.
And certainly many of the perennials can be divided after a couple of years and be used to fill in any blank places that you have.
Right.
Okay, there was a question earlier where you were talking about the gas exchange.
Gas exchange, right.
Could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
I would let you elaborate on that, Kirsten, because I picked that tip up from you, and so I have read about it, but my ability to re-explain it might not be very correct.
Well, essentially, it has to do with the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide with the soil and with the growing zone in which the plants are needing to survive in. And so that balance is very necessary. And Amy did a very good job of explaining about the soil structure and about the air pore spaces that need to hold air, carbon dioxide, oxygen, water, and so on in order for the plants to thrive.
Right. Thank you.
Amy, another question came from somebody who was concerned about the use of core.
Mm-hmm.
Is the use of core sustainable? And is that something that maybe we should stay away from in terms of using that material for retaining walls?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I know we should be trying to stay away from any kind of peat moss, right? Because the peat bogs are being completely disrupted by harvesting that. I don't know. I think it's a byproduct. I think that the husks from the coconut stuff is a byproduct. But that's a good question. That's something I should do a little more research on to find out. Okay. You're absolutely right. It's hard. Anything we try to use, there's going to be a story to it.
Getting back to the bed preparation, the bed establishment, with trees and shrubs and expanding those beds. And of course, it also has implications for this gas exchange. Mm-hmm. How do you feel about the use of cardboard as a means of getting beds established?
Well, I have heard both sides to the cardboard story. And I know that it is easy to use as a way to suppress or kill grass, right? Kill lawn, turf grass. I've used it myself. I've done that sort of lasagna method, but it's just usually been kind of in a small bed space, not more than, say, 4x4 or something like that. And it's very effective. And you can also, you need to make sure it's wet. You keep it wet, and you can go ahead and use it by cutting into the cardboard and planting. Go ahead and plant, But I've heard, we have one of our state forester people is like, don't use it because he thinks it actually helps. Again, it suppresses the gas exchange too much. I think mostly it breaks down. To me, it breaks down fast enough in certain situations that it's probably not a big deal. But again, where you're going to use it might be, what the factor.
Well, there's lots of good suggestions in the chat box about plants, and so everybody's looking forward to this next.
All right, so plants. So thank you for those comments and questions. In our urban environments, up to 40% of the plants in those environments are invasive species. That's an enormous amount of plant life that doesn't help us do much of anything. We also have very low biodiversity in our yards, maybe only 5 to 8 plant families in the typical yard. And again, all of this affects and has a huge impact on providing nutrition and habitat for our wildlife. And as I said before, the turf grass is one of the biggest problems we have because we have so much of it. So what do you want to do? So first thing you want to do is make sure you remove your invasive plants. And honestly, if all you had time to do is this would be huge. And talk to your neighbors about this. This would be huge, particularly, getting things like the porcelain berry off of everything and all of that. These plants are problematic because they are outcompeting some of our native plants, and then the berries that some of this stuff do contain, they do not have the same level of nutrition as the berries on the native plants. It's particularly the porcelain berry. I've heard them described as being like sugar pops. They give a lot of sugar. They don't have a lot of carbohydrates or fatty lipids in them, and birds just can't really use them for very long. So getting this stuff out is important. Things like garlic mustard and now I think Japanese stiltgrass, those plants actually are something that's called allelopathic. That means their root systems extrude a chemical which changes the soil chemistry. That's not good. Okay, so grabbing this stuff out, getting it out, making sure you know if these things are in your yard, that you are aware of them is important. And if you see them in your neighbor's yard, get them out. Probably the biggest problem we have still, though, is the English ivy. I mean, the English ivy, once it crawls up trees, it can actually crush a tree over time. And it will bury and flower when it's way up in the tree. So you don't see that it's burying and flowering up there, but the birds do, and they grab the seeds and they take them and distribute them everywhere else. And so English ivy is still one of our major problems. You want to try to plant the plants that are more amenable to our local ecoregions. And this ecoregion idea comes from, it's a long line of research, but the Plant Nova Natives campaign has in their booklet on native plants, which I gave you a link to, they talk about these ecoregions and how, plants that we have are very much situated and have evolved over long periods of time in concert with the soils and the wildlife and the different kinds of climate conditions. And so if we can put those back in and take out a lot of the ornamental stuff and particularly take out the invasive stuff, we would be doing a lot to help reshape the health of our local ecosystems. So right here in Northern Virginia, we actually have we're in the middle of two ecoregions. That line you see is to the right of that line is the coastal plain, and to the left is the Piedmont. And those ecoregions are defined by basically soil compositions. So the coastal plain, often the soil is a little more sandy, not always, but a little more. And then to the Piedmont, it's usually, a little more acidic, more forests. But there's all kinds of microclimates. There's all kinds of exceptions to this. And so, but the thing I think that it really, for us, what matters is that we have an enormous number of plants that we can pull from to put into our yards that would start to help rematch, the things that we need to do. So the right plant in the right place is another one of our mantras. You want to group plants by water and light needs. You don't want to buy plants that have been sprayed with neonics, I call them neonics, because that's a systemic herbicide and it's in the plant and it can stay in the plant for a while. You want to make sure you do your research about your plants, and it's so much easier now. When I first started as a master gardener in 2015, honestly, there was only a couple of databases out there, the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center and the University of and the Missouri Botanical Garden have wonderful databases about plants native to the United States. That was pretty much it. Now, within 5 years, we have, I think, probably at least a dozen great websites that provide all kinds of information on native plants. They have the lovely little finding mechanisms where you can put in all kinds of information about what you're looking for, something so high, and we'll deal with these conditions, and it'll spew out back for you a list of plants. There's even, a plant finder now from the National I think it's the National Wildlife Federation, that is about your zip code and what, birds and so forth you're trying to support, and will give you the plants for those birds. I mean, it just blew up. There's a lot of things out there for you to do. I would still start though with the Plant Nova Natives Guide, which you have the link to. It's just sort of start with that 100 plants and some of the information that they have in there about how to select plants. One thing you do need to know when you're doing your research is whether or not you are going to be putting in any trees or shrubs that might be dioecious, which means they have particular male and female plants. So it would be sad if you wanted to put in a persimmon tree, a native persimmon tree, and you just stuck one in and then realized you're never going to have any fruit. So knowing that is important. You also need to know there are certain, particularly certain viburnums that you need to have two individuals. Each individual has male and female flowers on it, but you have to have two individuals to have cross-pollination to be able to get good fruiting. These are those horticultural, these botanical issues that you should know about, or make sure you've looked just to be sure, because that will make a decision, help you define how much space you're going to need if you really want this particular kind of plant in there and you want it to be producing berries for fruit for yourself or berries for the birds. You want to structurally layer your plants and seasonally layer your plants. And this is just a couple of ideas here, in the sun. Here's some beautiful plants that my colleague Elaine Mills put together. In the spring, you have a beard tongue and moss phlox, first two, and then summer purple coneflower and blazing star, the two toward the upper purple ones. And then the fall, you can have heath aster and green stem goldenrod. These are the kinds of plants that will all do well in the same conditions. So having this kind of rolling number of plants or rolling blooms is really important too, for not just for our own aesthetic pleasure, because that's what we've always done with gardens anyway, is trying to make sure you have something blooming or whatever. But now we understand how important it is for our wildlife, and particularly our pollinators and insects, to have these kinds of blooms going all season as appropriate. Again, here's another idea for shade: columbine, stonecrop, American alum root, white turtlehead. These are all, there's a lot of beautiful plants, a lot of beautiful plants that we have access to in this region. The last thing is materials, in terms of one of the elements of sustainable landscaping. And materials, you really want to, if you can, reduce, reuse, and recycle, right? Material production, it has environmental costs. Like I was mentioning before with the getting a battery powered, one of these fancy battery powered mowers, right? That battery production has environmental costs to it. If you can use whatever's already in your yard, or that's the best thing to do, or just be thoughtful about where you're buying from, and try to use more locally found things. That's a good way to help reduce some of those extraneous energy costs and environmental costs that come along with material use. Okay, so site assessment, the site assessment issues to the elements of design. Do we have any other questions here real quick, Kirsten, before I start this part?
Yes, thank you. There was a question about light pollution relative to the little yard lights that we use, and how much of a concern do you feel that is?
Oh, like the ones you stick into the ground, like the ones that are solar powered?
Right. Or maybe even the ones that you use to light up the bottoms of trees or entranceways.
Oh, yeah. The little solar lights that use to define paths and stuff, I think those are kind of going in the right direction, because it's downward. You're using, solar energy to try to keep those lit. The lighting up of trees, like your house is an arboretum, when you underlight and upward, again, that's going to be disrupting the nocturnal rhythms of anything that's trying to live in your tree. Any birds, any caterpillars are not going to use that tree because they can't get a good night's sleep. So I would stay away from that kind of thing. I know some particularly if you have a big estate or whatever, you might use it, in a few places. But generally in our yards, I don't know that that's really a very, it uses energy, and it's again disrupting the cycle of the nocturnal cycle.
Okay, there was only one other concern, a little bit of a question about, a little confusion perhaps, about the ecoregions. You talked about 2 ecoregions, but the map seemed to show 3 different ones.
Oh, okay. I was saying for Northern Virginia, we have 2 that we work on.
Oh, okay.
Virginia has 3. Yeah, you're right. You've got the what is it called? I can go back. Yeah, you've got this other region out here, the Appalachian and Blue Ridge area. Yeah, there's more. But for us, we're right here. You see the fall line where we are. We're between 2 ecoregions, basically here in Alexandria. And Alexandria actually falls in the coastal plain, and Arlington actually falls kind of mostly in the Piedmont, but also some in the coastal plain. So we have those 2 ecoregions is what we are.
How about Fredericksburg?
Fredericksburg. I don't know. The EPA is the keeper of the ecoregions maps. I think Fredericksburg is going to be in the Piedmont. I think
Well,
is
certainly
Fredericksburg
just
done
to
it?
the
Isn't it?
certainly just to the east of Fredericksburg is the coastal plain.
Okay, yeah. So it could also be one of those places that shares those 2 ecoregions too, that you can plant things from both places. I'm not sure.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Okay. So site assessment, the sustainable site analysis that we're going to walk through real quickly. It helps you provide some of the parameters that you should be thinking about when you walk through your yard. And though these practices that I just mentioned are kind of these underlying foundational best management practices that you will help inform your design choices as you go along. So, but before you begin, I probably should have had this one a little earlier, is that you need to call the Miss Utility and ask them to come and mark your lines. It's really helpful to understand where your utility lines are, where your sewer line is, where your gas line is, all that kind of stuff, because you cannot and should not be digging around a gas line. You should be at least 3 feet from the gas line in any direction. If you're going to be planting, you don't want to put something over top of that, right? So if you want to site a tree or put in, big shrubs, big things, make sure you have this information. They come out and they just, they'll either flag it or they'll do that one of those sprays that they'll just mark it. And so then you'll have a better understanding of where this stuff is in your yard, okay? All right, so the first site analysis would be your soil, as we talked about. That was the first thing to do. And you basically, if you have the plat, the drawing of your site plat of your yard that comes with your home, great. Just kind of trace over it. Use bubble drawing around as you walk around. That's a really easy, wonderful way to get a better sense of what's going on in your yard. And you can walk around and look and see what kinds of soil issues you've got, what's really compacted, what's really wet, maybe. If you've got exposed rock, if things seem really shallow in some places, you have things change weird. And you can also, again, this will give you some more guidance if you think you might need to do some kind of a soil test on any part of it, because it's not doing very well. Things are not doing very well in that area. So that's the first one. Pretty simple. These bubble drawings. You can even just hand draw this out yourself. Just give yourself an understanding of where it is. If you use trace paper, then you can actually, fold these different maps on top of each other as well, put them on top of each other to get a better picture. With water, you're doing the same thing, but here you're actually, instead of just looking at the ground, you're looking at your house. Where is water coming down from your downspouts, from the roof, right? Where's it flowing? Which way does it go, right? Obviously, if you have any kind of tilt to your yard, any kind of slope, it's going to be going down that slope, right? But you walking through again and paying attention to this, where is it coming from? Somebody else's yard? Is it coming from somebody else's house, right? That's critical to understand. Where is it happening? Where's it coming from? Is it going out into the street? That kind of thing. The Landscape for Life materials has lots of really good, they walk you through all of these things, and they have some wonderful little exercise sheets and things you can fill out, and lots of calculations you can do to figure out how much water is coming off your roof and all that kind of stuff. This is also going to help you understand, where you might want to put a rain barrel in, that kind of thing. So your energy efficiency, again, I sort of hinted at some of this, is where you're going to be walking around, not just the yard, but the house, even the house. Where is it that it seems like it's too hot over here, too cold over here, or you're having some issues with wind problems? This kind of again, quick overview is really quite useful. If you're somebody who wants to put in solar, but you're going to do it, you need to think about, well, if you have to take trees out to do it, is that really the right thing to do? Because the trees may be providing some of the same kinds of services for you that the solar would. So, or equivalent kinds of services that the solar would. So those are some questions that you can, ask yourself. And then your vegetation, which is the most fun part, right? Walking around and trying to figure out what the heck is in your yard. You can use something called iNaturalist, which I love, which it gives you a sense. It may not exactly identify something, but it will often help you figure out more or less what something is. So you can figure out what kinds of trees have you got, what kinds of shrubs, what kinds of small plants, particularly if they're flowering, it's often easier to identify those. And when you go through your yard, I would actually encourage you to create like a spreadsheet and make sure you write all this stuff down, and then find out what the Latin name of these plants are. Okay, so the Latin name is going to tell you a lot about whether something might be not a native plant, because it'll have japonica in it or something, but also learning to use and be comfortable with Latin names is going to be very helpful to you when you decide to put in some native plants, because you need to ask for things by those names. Otherwise, you might get cultivars or something that you might not have wanted. Okay, so that's important. Also understanding what kind of canopy you have. If you can figure out where your canopy is, if it's giving you enough shade or too much shade or whatever, it's really a useful thing. And where would you have to mark tree protection zones? If you were going to put in a patio or something, where would you have to figure out where not to dig, right? And whether or not that patio might be interceding in certain tree roots. So you might have to change its shape. So you are going to be working with what you have, okay? And that's important. But you also, I'm sure, have a list of things you'd like to do, right? You want more play space, you want more party space, or healthier plants, or just, a calming space. God, I think that's what we all want, right? The calming space. You could walk out into a calming space. You have all of these kind of things that are helping shape your limitations or your ideas. So the design elements, we're not going to get deeply into design elements just because of time, but I do think that a couple of important ones here. One is order. Order is just the overall design of your overall framework of your design, and order is like the symmetry. It's more formal if you have things symmetrical. If you have things more asymmetrical, it gives a more naturalized look. Those are kind of obvious things. You mass and group things in uneven numbers, like that actually is, I think psychologically, that actually has been shown to produce a kind of calming effect, because you don't actually try to count them. If they're in an odd number, you're not actually counting. It seems more natural. So those are kind of important things to think about when you're thinking through your how you might lay out plants and where you're going to organize things. And order is, I think, subjective. This particular drawing is coming from an exercise, design exercise, and behind the thing I put in, it basically says that the one on the left is poor order, and the one on the right is good order. And I thought to myself, well, maybe it depends on what you want, right? If you need to have more play space and you need to have things opened up more for whatever reason, the one on the right is great. But if you're trying to be a little bit more naturalized in your yard and you really don't want to take out at least 2 trees just to put in more grass, you can create rooms in this yard. You can work in the corners and fill things out. There's ways you can just do sections of the yard to give it more flow, or to be less, I think, destructive of what's already there, if those plants that are in there are desirable to keep. So order is very much, can still be in the eye of the beholder. A landscape designer might prefer the right side because it's easier, it's quicker, you've got a distinct play space, and it might fit a particular need. But the one on the left is perfectly acceptable to in terms of how you want to think through your yard. It's perfectly acceptable to keep certain things and keep them sort of more asymmetrical or off. Okay. One thing you really, I think, this was important too in terms of discussing the soil issue earlier, is that defining where you're going to walk, where do you how do things flow in your yard, right? And that is one of the first things that you should be paying attention to when you start to think through how you might organize your yard or what you might do, what kinds of projects you might do in your yard. If it's possible to put in sort of natural mulch or these kinds of wooden stump rounds or whatever to give you a nice a multiple path, or if you need to put in, you know, some pavers or some other kinds of things, which will keep the traffic kind of in one place, which then allow you then to have beds on either side or on one side that you can prevent from getting further eroded or whatever. It's a good first thing to think about. And again, I've talked about massing the plants and using odd numbers. That's a really useful way to think about your planting ideas. This is the Sunny Garden in the Bon Air Park in Arlington, Virginia. This is one of the demonstration gardens for the Master Naturalist that I was mentioning earlier, where you can actually go and see some of the beautiful things that are a bloom. Also, make sure whatever plants you're starting to choose, you know how big they're going to get. I mean, that seems like a no-brainer, but the idea is you really want to be providing them the space for something in what it's going to be like at least in 5 years, particularly your trees and your shrubs, right? One thing that I've done this is I put in a small tree and then I put all these lovely sunny plants around it. And then within 2 years, the plant, you know, the tree, it was a red bud, it had already grown and it was shade underneath. I'm like, why didn't I think about that? I don't know, but I didn't. So make sure you think that through. How much space you've got, you know, how much root system space the plants will have is important. Okay, any quick questions there before I provide an overview or just some quick landscape shenarios of what some of our master gardeners have done?
Yes, Amy, there's a question about cultivars and a little bit of discussion about whether or not cultivars are good, bad, and different. And there's been some discussion on the chat box about it. Do you have any comments you'd like to make about that?
That is a really interesting conversation. Yes, I just listened to I've just listened to several other experts talk about this. The thing about cultivars is that there are cultivars. First of all, a cultivar is a plant that has been genetically manipulated. It's being grown for particular attributes. Okay, so but it's been manipulated to make sure that those attributes are always there. And particularly things like, you know, disease resistance or a particular flower color, a leaf color, that kind of stuff. And that is kind of the bread and butter of our horticultural industry, is creating cultivars and then trademarking them or patenting them and then putting them out into garden centers and making quite a lot of money and calling them proven winners or calling them whatever, saying that they're pest free, which means that nothing's eating them or whatever. But that's cultivars are a huge part. They are the bread and butter of the horticulture industry. So when we talk about cultivars now, we're actually getting into a grayer area of something called nativars, which nativars are plants that have been selected from a native plant. Well, all plants have been selected from some native plant originally, but now we're talking about local native plants where they find a local native that has a particular attribute, and then they try to repeat that particular attribute and call it a nativar and trademark it. They actually can't patent it, but they can trademark it. Okay, so the thing is that it's going to really depend on what the plant is. First of all, mostly the native plants we already know that they are attached to particular insects, particular birds. We already know that there's an interaction there that's been going on for quite some time. So we feel confident that that's probably, if you can go that way, that's the best way to go. But if you're going to go inspect, you know, kind of explore some of these other things, the reason you might explore a nativar is that it's compacted, it's smaller than the native. This is particularly true for our shrubs, right? We have big shrubs. We have like 2 small shrubs in all of our plant palette. We have a couple of small shrubs. Most things are big. They're at least 6 feet, 8 feet shrubs. So maybe these have been compacted. They found a native kind that is smaller. So they're going to be selling that. Or they're disease resistant to certain kinds of fungi or something like that, or molds. disease and that. So those things I can see why people would go that direction, because you want it to fit a certain space, but you don't want it to be, you want to limit your maintenance on it. Okay. And that may be okay. The thing is the research is now ongoing about what effect really these cultivars or these nativars have on the wildlife. So what I am learning is that it really depends. You don't want to have any plants that have anything called a double flower. You don't want plants that have flowers that have been so changed from the original flower that nothing can feed on it. You don't want to have plants that have had their color of their leaves changed, because that, if you go to a red leaf, that has more anthocyanins, and that's not good for insects. So the thing is that so there's the research is ongoing to find out whether these things can still have some kind of place in the plant world, right? And those people who are really passionate about native plants are just like, just let's stay away from that. But those people who are like, well, I can't get access to native plants very easily. I'm stuck with finding whatever is at my local garden center. And they're mostly selling these native cultivars of some sort. Or how good are they? The question is, they're trying to figure that out, whether they have any ability to do so, any ability to provide nectar, at least nectar for bees and butterflies and so forth. And the thing that's changed with this, I think is important, is that the horticulture industry now considers whether or not their plants feed insects to be a parameter that they are testing for. That is huge. Before, they didn't care, so now that is actually something that they're looking at when they're testing new plants or coming up with new plants, whether they have any value at all to wildlife. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but it's a complicated one, and I appreciate you bringing it up.
A whole class for another day, isn't it?
It is.
I can recommend a dog-friendly ground cover or management of the landscape to accommodate active dogs. Much appreciated.
Yeah, that's a tough one, because a lot of our, the things that you might think of like sedges or something to replace the grass, sometimes they're just not that hardy. They just don't. That's one of the reasons turf grass is so popular, is because it stands up to a lot of traffic, even though the inputs on it are very high to keep it that way. I would say clover might be the best bet. White clover is often, our lawns used to have white clover in them. When I was a child, back in the dark ages, they had white clover in our lawns. That was part of the seed mix of the grass. So having more clover in a lawn could be a good way to, bridge the gap a little bit, because clover does provide some, has a flower and has some nectar for like ground nesting bees. It's something, right? It also, I think, has a better root system than grass. But if you were to just keep your grass taller and allow the root system of your grass to grow longer, so whatever length your grass is above ground, that's more or less what it is below ground. So you've got, 2 inches or 3 inches here, that's about what it is. But if you let your grass grow a bit longer, then the root systems get a bit longer. But I think having kind of a mixed thing with clover, a little, maybe you've got some grass, maybe things have started coming in. There's something called poverty oak grass that kind of finds its way in. It's a native plant. You'll be surprised if you leave your grass a little longer and start treating it more like a potential zone for other kinds of plants.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, so the landscape scenarios really quickly here. One more quick showing of an eroded slope. This master gardener, she and her husband, had this really bad problem, as you can see, along the side of their house. And it was actually coming from the street. The water was coming down. They live on a slope. Obviously, it was coming from the street and moving in and creating quite a big mess. So what they decided to do was use the French drain method. And they created a trench all the way basically from the gate all the way down. And as you can see on the left-hand side, they dug down probably at least a foot and put in rock, and then they put in that landscape cloth. So here's an appropriate use of the landscape cloth, because here the landscape cloth is helping you keep the silting, the soil silting from coming in and filling up the pipe, right? So you put the pipe, and the pipe is that one of those old perforated pipes. It's got holes in it as well. Some rock, the pipe, you fill it up, you fill it all the way up to the top with more rock, and then you like a burrito, just put the landscaping cloths over it. And then they did this wonderful stepped staircase that's basically a series of little terraces all the way down, and filled that again with gravel. So that's a pretty engineered issue, a pretty engineered thing, but it really was going to help them a lot with the water situation. They also put in at the bottom, down at near the back of their yard, they put in a nice sort of, a lot of plants that like water. So I'm not exactly sure all of them that they put in, but they put in plants that like water. So if there was still water coming, they would go to that spot. They could have also, but they did not, they could have done something at the front of the yard too, at the street level, but they decided to work first here and then, keep because that was the worst problem. Here's another master gardener who had a wet, soggy area in the back. She's got a yard that slopes, just like mine does. She has a large yard that slopes. And what she decided to do was to put in this kind of bioswale. I think they actually also put in a French drain as well. And so the water coming off of the house is connected to that French drain. And then there's put a lot of rock on top of that, and then planted very heavily with a lot of really pretty plants that like water. And as you can see, as it's starting to fill in, it's quite a nice space. And so she's keeping some grass there because she wanted a little area for a play area for her grandchildren. You can see there was she did leave some grass, but just planted all the way around it. And here's another couple of views of how useful that is, and how much sort of beautiful hedge that she's created in the back there that is watered by the downspout. Really, they don't have to water that area at all. It's already gets plenty of water. She just has to she said she has to do some weeding, but that's about it once it's grown in. This is my yard. And my yard, as you can see, I'm on a slope. The water is coming, it's like the yard above me, yard on one side is 2 inches higher than mine. The yard next to the other side is 2 inches lower. We've just got this lovely step plateau right on down. So the water just rolls off of things, comes through my yard. So I did a little bit of small amount of terracing there, trying to find something. That's my dog, trying to find some way to terrace, this area right here, to help with the water, stop the water. These plants all down here, I've got viburnum, I've got arrowwood viburnum, a lot of things down here that would help soak up some of the water. I've also, there was a large tree, so the area you were looking at is over here. And so this tree, I also started planting around this tree with some sedges to try to help find ways to hold the water in. As well, off the other part of the house in the front, I had an issue on the side of the house. I put in a small amount of rock and a little bit of a bioswale, and then planted a lot of clethra along the downspout. So here's the water comes in through my rain barrel, and then it comes down under here, and it comes out to this spot here, which is right around here. So, but the clethra has been amazing. It's been doing really, really well in this space and provided a really nice hedge there. So a hot, dry space. This is, I know a lot of you, if you do have this right along your street, I mean, this is problematic because it's very compacted. It's hard to get things to grow. This particular photo from Plant Nova Natives shows a lot of phlox. Phlox is a really nice one for these. I've seen phlox used in a number of places on kind of hot, dry hills. It does well. So native phlox work quite well there. This median strip was one that a group of master gardeners was trying to help the county figure out a good plan for it, because it just looks so sad and it has such potential. And the ideas that they came up with are literally ideas that you too could use in your own yard in terms of the kinds of plants that go in. That particular space, because it was so flat, it might have to have a bit more soil, either amended or taken up and giving you some more good topsoil in there, or some more compost in there, because the soil is going to be really quite compact. It's like being in a container for a long time. but the ideas that they came up with, I think, are quite nice in terms of trying to figure that out. But you can see the number of plants, the dwarf goldenrod, the eastern prickly pear, mountain leaf, the mountain mint, butterfly weed. There's a lot of great perennials. The little blue stem, eastern blazing star, there's a lot of grasses that would do well in that kind of an area. Like I told you about that switchgrass, but there's something called a broom sedge that will look really good there. So that we have a lot of potential, a lot of things to put into that kind of a situation. But the removing of some of the soil or amending the topsoil first, keeping that area mulched, figuring out how to make sure it gets water, enough water to get the plants established is important. Because that plant that does not have a water system there. They would have to bring the water in to do that. So that's a little trickier. But once the plants are established, over time, you should be able to use less water. You shouldn't need to use a lot of mulch. Things should be able to be a little more self-sufficient. These are photographs from the Simpson Waterwise Garden in Alexandria. And this is beautiful, just showing you what it kind of looks like in March before things have popped out, May, and then, later on in June. And it's just a wide diversity of plants in here. And if you go to visit this garden, you can find information on these plants. I think that also you can find a little bit more information here at the website because it's on our mgnv.org website. But you can see this is a good, showing you a good idea about how things change and what kinds of plants what kinds of plants can do over time and how many beautiful plants we have to choose from again. My colleague Elaine Mills will be talking about native plants specifically as in connection with this whole discussion about sustainable landscaping in a couple of months. So you'll get a really, really wonderful talk from her about specific native plants and more photos of plants. So Habitats for Wildlife, just real quickly here, this is something that I've kind of been infusing throughout this, that what we are trying to do is this is one of our parameters that we really want to try to nurture. And for wildlife, layering for wildlife is the way you've layered your plants is equally important for how for the wildlife, particularly your trees and your shrubs, because that's what provides the structure for them to forage and to nest. And most birds, a good number of birds nest between 5 and 15 feet from the ground. So, and then, they definitely forage within 15 feet of the ground. You also want to, and this particular comes from the Audubon at Home website, which can give you more information. I've given you a number of sites that have much more specific detail on the kinds of habitat structure that's needed for particular kinds of wildlife. And if you have at least some understanding of that, that can also help inform how you design your whole yard. So plant more trees and shrubs is kind of the, it's one of the basics that we often are advocating. In particular, the idea that you're aiming for, and there's been some research done on this now that, if you have more than 70% of the native woody plant biomass in your yard, meaning all the trees and the shrubs, if you have at least 70% of your yard is that, then you are more likely to have the kind of support system that will help promote reproduction of pollinators, and that reproduction of pollinators will help support bird reproduction. And this is all coming from a study by Desiree Narango, who worked with Doug Tallamy and Peter Mara of the Smithsonian's Migratory Bird program. They were looking at chickadees, and chickadees literally in the yards in Arlington and in some DC and some in Alexandria, and using Nest Watch, which is a citizen science program that the Smithsonian supports, and trying to understand, what does a single species need in order to be able to produce young, fledge those young, and have, continue its reproduction. So this is, I think, an important idea that I think more and more is going to be, we're going to find out more and more about some of these specifics, which can help us with our metrics, so to speak, when we think about what kind of plants we're going to put into our yard. Also, as I said before too, you want to aim for some more biodiversity in your plants. So when you're doing your plant list, see if you can figure out what the, find out what the family is that the plant is coming from. Because if you're just if you don't realize that you're putting in nothing but asters, then you're putting in just one kind of flower type, really. And in order to support more diversity of insect interactions with plants, you need more types of flower shapes, right? So looking at the family name of the plant is a helpful guide for you as you're starting to fill out your matrix of what you've got going on. This is just another, Elaine Mills has offered this shrubs for songbirds. Some that in the spring, they're red chokeberry and fragrant sumac. In the summer, American beautyberry, which is in the top middle here. An elderberry here at the bottom. And this is bushy St. John's wort, which is, as I mentioned, we have maybe 2 small shrubs, and actually this is one of them. But these are all lovely, lovely, easy to care for once you get them established plants. What are you trying to do in your yard? In essence, you are also trying to not just garden for yourself and your family and your dog and your friends, but you're also trying to garden for the insects, because they're the basics. They're the basic biome that we need here to make sure that things are properly pollinated, that everything has enough to eat, etc. So in terms of food, when you're creating your pollinator gardens of any sort, you want to make sure that when you mash your plants, you have at least 3 by 3 foot section of a plant. Okay, and the reason that's being suggested is because what you're trying to do is provide enough feeding ground for your birds or your bees or your butterflies, that they won't have to spend a lot of energy flying from one thing to the next. Okay, so 3 by 3 mass of nectar plants is a minimum. You also want to make sure you're including host plants, and a host plant is a plant in which the pollinating insect will actually leave its caterpillar chrysalis on. Okay, so it's what it's putting its eggs on, and those are very important too. And that's what those plants are what the young, once it develops into a caterpillar, that's what the young caterpillars will probably eat first when they come out. In terms of nesting, there's a lot of information in some of these wildlife gardening sites that talk about things you need to leave for nesting. Most of our native bees, a large portion of our native bees are actually ground nesters. So I've been telling you all of this time, put down mulch, do this. You can actually leave some bare spots in your yard. And if you see holes that seem to indicate that you have native bees, don't plant over those. Allow those bees to have a little space, right? Tree snags, if you've got to take a tree down, if you can leave it at least 15 feet of what's left of the old tree, that provides a lovely, lovely snag for birds and for certain kinds of insects. Down wood also can help with the nesting for bees and for other kinds of insects. The leaves, as I've already mentioned, fireflies are particularly the ones that are affected mostly by our removal of all of our leaves, which is a very sad thing. And also when the stalks of your perennial plants, leave those up as long as you can, really, into the spring, because those stalks often are hollow inside, and that's where, again, insects will leave their eggs. And so you want to make sure that those are completely done and have grown out and burst out of their little egg sacs and run off into the garden, and you haven't just mulched them away someplace. And again, don't use pesticides if you can possibly help it. So think like a pollinator. This is a graphic that's on the MGNB site, which is a wonderful one that has, again, some of the things I just mentioned, but it's talking about how you need to provide the right food sources and think about the energy of those little insects as they are trying to feed and to reproduce. So the messy thing is, I think, the most important to me, because I'm like, that cuts us all a break. We don't have to do as much as we used to do. It's great. So you can also, particularly when you're thinking about the plants you're going to choose, you can actually plant in themes, right? You can plant for hummingbirds, and that would be choosing some of the plants that we have that have tubular shapes. So you can put some of those in your yard. Hummingbirds are a pollinator. They're one of our pollinators in this area. You can also use these guides as help for you to think through the plants. And as I mentioned before, the Plant Nova Natives Guide here is the first one. It has a lot of some case studies in the back. It has a lot of information about specific kinds of landscape problems and which plants in particular are good for those problems. So that's a really helpful guide to get you started. And also the plantnovanatives.org site has many more landscaping stuff on it, particularly for HOAs and larger spaces. They have a lot of information there. I highly recommend checking that out. And they also have a programming going on to help, like particularly HOAs, with figuring out how to do this, because that's shared. It's private land, but it's sort of shared. And so figuring out how to work with your HOA board and all that to reimagine a landscape is a little tricky. So they have a lot of help there. The Conservation Landscaping Guide to the right here, guidelines from the Chesapeake Conservation Landscaping Council is a really useful one. This Fish and Wildlife landscaping one for the Chesapeake Bay watershed is essentially all of the information that's in here has actually been, I think all of it has been transferred into this Chesapeake Bay Native Plant Center, which is one where you can go in and provide, whatever parameters you need. You can search for plants to help fulfill the particular conditions. This one here on creating and inviting habitats is a wonderful one that one of our master gardeners, Mary Free, put together a few years ago, and it's great. It's got a lot of really helpful tips in there. So I'm coming to the end here, and I just want to tell you that there are more classes for you if you are interested in these things. Next week, we're going to have my colleague, Alyssa Ford Morell, is going to talk about edible landscaping. And Alyssa has also spoken specifically on the Audubon at Home project program. And that video of her talking about what that program is and how you get involved is on our virtual our MG virtual classroom list. And in a couple, next month in the February and in March, my colleague Joan McIntyre and Beth Buffington will be talking about building healthy soil and managing water in your yard. So the things that I just kind of skimmed over today, they're going to get much more deeply into it, really talk about like the compost issue and really talk about, what you have to do. And then my colleague Elaine Mills in March will give you an overview of how you select native plants for your home garden. And Elaine has also done a couple of videos already that are on the MG virtual classroom. She's done one on gardening for pollinators in small spaces. So she talks about how to use containers for that kind of approach. She also talks about climate change and your garden, which has a lot of other really important information in it for you to know. And then I can tell you, there's like a lot of other stuff on the MG virtual classroom. There's something about turf alternatives. My Don Bobby, another master gardener, talked about those. We have Joyce Hilton talking about how to take care of your lawn if you do need lawn, how to do it right. So I highly recommend checking out that particular bunch of resources that we have. So are there any other questions? I know we're running over time, aren't we?
Well, your ears must be burning because everybody has lovely things to say in the presentation today. There are no other questions. One person said they didn't quite catch your reference to a good resource for professional landscapers. A good reason? I'm sorry. A resource. I think you were talking about the tried and true native plants. A particular resource for professional landscapers or property managers. Okay, I would go to actually, we have actually had, I believe, that there have been, there's been at least one professional landscaping company that has asked to use the tried and true in their, when they talk about plants to their clients. So that it is useful in that way. But if you wanted to check out the Plant Nova Natives site, they literally have sections for professional landscapers and how to, other kinds of resources for them to use. Basically, a lot of them would be using most of the same resources we are. All the resources are now quite available to the public. And so there's not like there's really anything secret that they would have that we wouldn't have access to. So yeah, I would say check the Plant Nova Natives site out because they are sort of
focusing on trying to help professional landscapers with some of these issues and changing some of the practices that they have been doing conventionally for a while.
Okay, well, that's very good. There are no other questions. Everybody's loving it. So I just want to say thank you for coming today, everybody.
This has been great. I really appreciate everybody coming, and I wish you all great success in your yards. And I just want you to know that you are doing something for the wider community, you know, for a much larger group of people than just yourselves when you're out there working in the yards. And I really appreciate that.